Hello there from Buffer's Brewery. I want to talk to you today about a little conundrum that is the King Keg. Here's my King Keg in the fridge. I've been drinking some of my ale from it and it needs to be recharged with CO2. It's too high to put the CO2 in the original King Keg cap, but I've made a modification. So I can charge the King Keg while it's still in the fridge. I'll show you how I did my modification. So this was the original valve I modified. As you can see, I've cut the original valve into two pieces and inserted a brass elbow fitting between the two, and I've soldered them in position. You'll notice that the rubber band safety valve has disappeared, and I replaced that with a proper sprung-loaded safety valve rated at 15 psi onto the T which I've had my pressure gauge fitted to. I realised that there was a shortcoming with this approach in that in this area here there is a large volume of dead space which is difficult to clean and sanitise, and because of that, every time you insert some more CO2 into your barrel, you're blowing whatever is in this volume of dead space into your beer. So I've changed the design and I use now just a piece of tube rather than an elbow. And this is the design I now use. I'm also going to make one that retains the old rubber band safety valve, and I'll show you how I do that in this video. So these are the things that you'll need for this modification. Obviously, the original valve, I've taken all the rubber fittings off of it, the safety valve, the non-return rubber, the rubber washer that was under the head, and also the O-ring that was just inside the port. You also need some 4mm outside diameter copper pipe. And if you're going to replace the safety valve with the sprung-loaded safety valve that I showed you before, you'll also need a short length of 3mm diameter brass rod, and that's to block the safety valve port which is there. You only need about 10mm of it. Just put a piece of the rod in that port there and just solder it in place. During the soldering processes, this stem here, which is actually screwed into this body and held in place by thread lock, the heat used to do the soldering degrades the thread lock, and this piece will unscrew and also obviously leak. So during the modification process, this stem needs to be refitted. I solder it in place to seal it, and that obviously then becomes a permanent piece. So I'm going to cut this, because I'm going to retain the safety valve on this one. I'm going to cut the original valve body into just at the end of the screw thread where the CO2 cylinder screws onto. If I was going to not retain the safety valve, I just use the groove of the safety valve vent as a guide, and I just cut it in there. But when I've cut it in two, you'll see what it looks like, and we'll take it from there. So there is the original valve cut in two. So I've retained the section for the rubber band safety valve, and this is the piece that goes onto the cylinder, the CO2 cylinder. Okay, so I've cut and bent, or bent and cut, a piece of the copper tube. So that's going to go into there, and we'll solder that in position. And then this bit will go in there, and we'll solder that into position. And that'll be our modified valve. Okay, so I've soldered the tube into the first part of the body. And I just thought I'd show you the stem that's come out of there. You can see it's screwed in. So what I do now is I just give that a good clean, and then with a little bit of flux on the thread, I do it up till it stops, and then I just back it off about a turn, and then I solder that in. Just gives me a little bit of a gap there for the solder to wet into. And once that's done, I then solder the second piece of the body onto this end of the tube. And there's the finished item, all soldered up. So the tube soldered into both ends, and the stem also is soldered up. So that's ready to go. Put all the rubber bits back on. If in the future you decide you don't want to use the old rubber band safety valve, you can just block this hole up, as I said before, with a piece of 3mm rod soldered in place, and then you can fit another safety valve, as I did on my setup. I'll just put the seals back on, and we'll see what it's like. So, bit of a struggle, but it is always. The non-return valve rubbers on, cap rubbers on, safety valve rubber is in place, and the O-ring is in place there. So that is all ready to be fitted back on the cap. And there you go. One thing I discovered when I first did this modification is that it's pretty hit and miss as to the direction that this ends up because of the flats inside the cap, and you could end up with the cap being fully tightened and the pressure inlet being pointed away. So what I did, I just filed the flats off because they're no longer necessary with this design, and then you can turn, having tightened that up fully onto your King Keg, you can turn this around so that it's facing forward when you do the nut underneath. But this is a brand new lid, so it's still got flats in it. But anyway, you can see that's with the safety valve in place, and that's with no safety valve. The choice is yours. Thanks. Hope you've enjoyed the movie.